Can I start? Perfect. Okay, first of all, thank you for the great music. I will shortly introduce myself so you know who I am and who will... First of all, thank you for the great music. I will shortly introduce myself so you know who I am and who will...
I know the problem. Sorry. Yeah, here. Okay. I think now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
Is it working? Okay, perfect. Okay, I will shortly introduce myself so you know who I am and who will guide you through this evening. My name is Jackie Jaskowski. I'm a booking agent and I closely work with some female musicians who share their experience on gender discrimination on a regular basis with me, so the topic is very familiar to me. Yeah, and I will introduce Marie Buscatto as well. So she's a professor of sociology. Oh my God, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. Sociology at the University of Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne. Her research focuses on sociology of work, arts, and gender. She published a book named Women in Jazz, Musicality, Femininity, and Marginalization, which was firstly published in 2007, and the English translation was published in 2021. And maybe Marie, you want to give us a little introduction on what your book is about and your research is about.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everybody. I cannot see anything, so I'm from Paris, as mentioned. So yes, in 1998 I started a study on female singers, and then I followed up with a female instrumentalist in France, in jazz. And I published a book in 2007, and it was reissued in French in 2018. So then I used different partial studies which had been done in France again, and which showed that almost nothing had changed. And then in 2021, because I had presented my results in different countries, UK, Romania, Bulgaria, US, and everybody said, oh, this is exactly what happens in our country. It was published in English with an English-speaking preface. And basically, what I'm going to tell you is nothing new. So I was asked to speak 10 minutes, so we have a lot of room to discuss and share. I think that's the most important thing here. I'm just going to share some empirical results, but it's nothing new to you, I think. When you think of the reasons why this world is so masculine, numerically, of course, it's less than 10% in France, for instance, and it's about the same thing all around the world. But also symbolically, it's a very masculine things. And even some people were saying, okay, there are not many women because it feels so masculine. So how can we explain how this happens? I found different social processes, as mentioned by the person who presented me. I'm a sociologist, so of course I'm working on social processes. One of them is what we call now feminine stereotypes. So women, whether they're singers or instrumentalists, even if it works a bit differently depending on the instrument or the singing act, they tend to be associated with frailty, sexuality, not being very creative, etc. And it's always pejorative. It's not a good thing to be associated with feminine qualities. It's not only in music, it's anywhere in the world. And so this is the first reason it's difficult for them when they are young or older to get recognized as full-time artists. A second social process which appeared as very important is networking, which is very masculine. So men tend to recruit other men, and in jazz you need to be recruited as much as you recruit others. You cannot be a leader only, you need to be a side woman, a side man. And men tend to recruit each other, and it's not meant against women, it's just their friends their pals, the people they drink with, the people they speak about different topics which may not be shared with feminine or female musicians as well. So they tend to reproduce this very masculine environment. A third social process which appeared as very important was social conventions, which are also very masculine. I'm sorry to use this word so many times, but it's a masculine world, so there are some good reasons to use it. So it means, women tend to be socialized differently from men. They tend to be socialized not to assert themselves, not to speak even when they have nothing to say. Guys tend to be socialized to take their part, to assert themselves. So social conventions in jazz tend to value people who speak. And when women do it in a masculine way, they tend to be considered as problematic, as not good pals, because men and women are socialized to think that women should stay in their feminine roles and men should stay in their masculine roles. So it's not only about being competent in doing it, it's also about being allowed to do it without paying a social price, which is, she's a pain in the ass, to say it very plainly. A fourth thing which was very important for social process, but it's not the most important, I would say secondary, is when there are women and men are over 30, they may think of having kids, and women tend to be considered and consider themselves as more in charge than their male counterparts. So they tend, even in a musical partnership, if their partner is a musician, to have more responsibility in taking care of the kid and being at home. And as you all know, jazz is about being flexible, being working in the evenings, for instance, as we are just doing now. It's about working on weekends. And so you need someone to take care of the kid, and men tend to find partners who are ready to do it, while women tend not to have such partners, or not so easily. So these are like the key limiting processes which accumulate over time. So from one musician to the others, they may work differently. They may work differently depending on the moment in their lives too. When you are 45, it's different from when you are 25 or 55. But at the end of the day, these are social processes you can observe happening and limiting women as compared to men to succeed in the jazz world and to make it first, and then to maintain themselves, and then also to get recognized. But then there are some women who make it. Here we heard someone, women playing on stage, and some of them remain, and some of them are even very famous in Germany, in France, in the US, you name it. So what happens? How do we explain that? There were a few social processes, again, which were which were helping this woman to maintain themselves in the jazz world. The first one, which was key, and not only in France, but you can find it in other countries, and it may be the same in Germany, is music schools. So women, more often than men, tend to have attended a full curriculum in jazz, and this helps in different ways. It helps because, of course, they learn the skills, while men may learn them on the job with friends. Women tend not to be friends, so that's a good place to learn. But also they are more considered as more competent because of their diploma or their trainings. And also they may meet their partners to have a band, but also sometimes to have a relationship. So music schools are key in explaining that some women make it. A second key process was what I called over-socialization. So women, more often than men, tend to come from good social origins. They tend to be living a relationship, and sometimes a few of them, because they may change partners, as men do, with male musicians or producers or programmers, people who work in the jazz field. They may also have attended very good jazz curriculum, as I already said. So this is over-socialization is very important to explain. These women who make it are most of the time very protected in some ways by their social origins, their families, their friends, their school paths. And a third thing that was very important to explain that women may make it, even if it's more difficult than for men, is the fact that they are going to work with these feminine stereotypes. As I said before, is they are very pejorative, but they may work in different ways because they become aware of them very early on. They know they are sexualized and they are going to be flirted with in ways which are not always the ones they are looking for. They know that they may be considered as incompetent because they are considered as frail or not creative enough, or mothers who cannot be reliable, things like that. These are stereotypes. So they may either use them as feminine capital, so because they are asked to be attractive, they may work on their appearances, their hair, their jewels to make it worth for producers and programmers. They may also, the other way, completely the other way around, try to neutralize their seductive abilities, their femininity. So they may, like I'm doing, short hair, no makeup, no jewels. So, and in the way they play, they just assert themselves in what is called masculine gestures. So, to conclude, it's very weird for me to be still speaking about this study, and in France, of course, but also all around the world, while I started it almost 25 years ago. And why is it so? The main reason is because nothing has changed, or not much. Even if we speak about it, even if people read my book, and even if I'm interviewed in newspapers in French, in English, and now in Germany and in Austria, I've been in different places. I can find 3 reasons why the jazz world is so slow in changing, while everybody says it's a problem. The people I met 25 years ago, men and women, thought it was a problem. They needed more women, they needed to be less masculine in their ways and in their numbers. And the 3 reasons I may find is, first reason that you find anywhere in society is being a woman, a man, and behaving in feminine ways when you're a woman and masculine ways when you're a man is just considered as a natural thing. It's we are socialized right from birth to be good women, good men, to behave in feminine ways when we are women, and masculine ways when we are men, and we just don't think of it as either an issue or something we could counteract. And even if we wanted, it's very it's so ingrained in us. So if a woman starts to behave in masculine ways, we feel threatened, we feel troubled, we don't feel comfortable. When a man behaves in a feminine way, we also feel, what's happening? I don't feel good, I don't feel comfortable. So it's not something we think of. So changing this is very hard, and not only in jazz. A second reason is jazz, as art worlds, is obsessed with talent. And there is this belief that talent will end up being the winner at the end of the day. So, if women are talented, they will make it. So, okay, if women, men, yes, there are inequalities, but if we start helping women more than we help men, then we will become mediocre. It will be weak, it will be bad jazz. So even if people in some ways criticize jazz worlds and say, okay, it's not fair, it's not the best ones who make it, you have all these discourses, but when it comes to changing and helping women out, this is considered as a bad thing because talent will be second. And a third reason why it can be so difficult to make things change, even if people are persuaded to change, could be also that as you all know, I think, it's a very competitive world. A lot of people want to be jazz musicians. There are not so many possibilities. Every year you wonder whether next year we will make it, you will have enough money, if it will be possible to play the jazz you want to play. So it's really difficult, long hours, flexibility, poor pays. So in some ways, when I have to decide who is going to play in my band, you know, choosing a woman or a man is the last thing I think of. Whether I'm a man or a woman, actually, I'm just trying to, you know, invite my pals who are going to invite me, and we try to work together so we support each other in this very difficult world. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope I didn't speak too long, and we have some room to discuss and share before the jam starts.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, do you have any questions, the audience, to Marie? Or any thoughts you want to share? Okay, right now it doesn't seem like it. Okay, so one thing that was on my mind was when we talk about like feminized like instruments, for example, and like, for example, we have a lot of female musicians are, for example, singers, but on like the instruments we have like the lack of female musicians on instruments is like bigger than like as a singer. And I was wondering like if we have that, like if we have that, if we don't have like these role models, then we have that problem that like young kids or young girls, I think they would probably, like, it has the effect on which instrument they would choose to play in a young age. And so I was wondering like how we can like get to the point where we can show young girls like role models, how we bring them on stage, like how maybe you have an idea for like a concept, for example, that we can, I don't know, work with, that we can bring more women on stage, so also like the kids will have more role models to look up to, and maybe their choice of the instrument will like lead to a bigger presence of female instrumentalists.
Okay, I'm not someone who gives advice. I try to analyze situations and try to show how it works. But the few things I can say about how it works is what studies show all around the world is some instruments are considered as feminine, some instruments are considered as masculine. And right from the beginning, girls tend to choose feminine instruments. Their parents tend to want them to play these instruments. So, you know, violin is more feminine, the piano is more feminine, singing is more feminine, the drums, double bass is more masculine. So in some ways you could say, okay, this is just right from the beginning, so we have no say once we think about the professional world. What we find is even with women who are playing the drums or the double bass or the trumpet, which are considered as masculine, they tend to be confronted with the same inhibiting social processes I described. So they have to prove themselves twice more. So you would say, it doesn't make sense. There are so few of them. They should be welcomed. They should be helped out. No, they are also confronted with the difficulties women who are in feminine instruments are confronted with. So there is no difference whether you are a singer or you are a trumpet player. In that, you're always confronted with these pejorative feminine stereotypes that you're frail, that you're not creative, that you're a sexual object more than a performer, and that you're someone to flirt with and not to listen to. And the ears don't work well, whatever the instrument you play. So in some ways, it's not a question, what I would say is not a question of role models, it's a question of allowing women to do it when they do it, and to make the jazz world a world where women are considered as fairly as men when they perform. And it's a very difficult thing to do because it's so natural not to think about it. So I can share a study with you which was done in the US. It's classical music. It's done at the end of the 90s. It's about the 6 main orchestra in the US, and they recruit. And they used to recruit knowing who was playing. And they had a lot of corruption going on, so they thought it would be good to have a screen, so nobody would know who is playing. And using the screen, 30% more women. The only fact that you don't know whether she's a woman or a man, you tend to recruit more women. So this would be more efficient, using screens or training people not to bias their ears, not to bias their behaviors with female players, whatever they play, whether they sing or whether they play the drums. It's no different. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you. Okay, are there now any questions from the audience? Okay. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I cannot see anything. I
okay.
only see my face on the screen. I
That's
don't know who is speaking, where, in which context.
I guess you won't see it. Oh, okay, now you see me. Okay,
Yes.
I'm here.
There are some people in the room. Good news.
I was gonna ask, because you were talking about the visual aspect of being a female musician, that it's quite a thing still. And I was curious on your kind of the research that you did in terms of how all the new media, like social media and all this kind of stuff, has an effect on that, because it is such a visual thing, right? If you're on Instagram, for example, it's so important on how you're presented and stuff. And I guess the question is, if you think that it kind of has a more negative effect because it's kind of again then on the visual aspect and not so much on just the musical aspect, if you will.
Oh, I can see you.
Yeah. Hi.
It makes a full difference.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Now
yeah.
I know you have a beard, so
and
no, I'm
a
kidding.
man. Yeah. So. All right. Yeah. So.
No, I
that's my
couldn't hear
question.
you were a man, even
Cool. Yeah.
Sometimes we make mistakes.
I hope
but
so. Yeah. All right. Yeah. That's my question.
Okay. That's a very good question. So, one thing I didn't say, and I'm a sociologist of work. So, the first thing I did, and when I supervise PhDs and when I work with colleagues, the first thing we do is what does it mean to make a living with jazz? So, in France and in the US and in Great Britain and in Germany, it's always the same. You can never live being a leader. You cannot make a living being a leader only. Right now I'm finishing a study of jazz in Japan, the same thing. So you lead 1 or 2 bands. Luckily, even if you're very well recognized, you will play 20 times a year. And I speak about these people who are very well recognized. I don't speak about modest artists and most of the people who make a living with jazz. And then you need to be recruited. You need to be recruited as a sideman, and it can be a one-time project, it can be a trio, it can be a big orchestra. It can also be about teaching a few times a week. It can be about sidelining in pop music and composing music for movies, whatever. So you never make a living only going on Instagram and saying, look, I'm Mario Buscatto, this is my band, and this is not rock, this is not rap, this is a very collective activity, and you need to be recruited. That's why it's not about Instagram, it's not about, even if they use it and they use Facebook. In my study of Japanese jazz musicians, I'm following them up on different social media. Social media are used to advertise concerts and to get the audience. But it's not about getting recruited. Getting recruited is, we play together, we have a workshop, we have a drink, someone speaks about me to someone else, I organize a project and I need a flutist, and that's when networking is so important. And that's why if masculine networking is so important, women don't get recruited. So the women, recently for a project, I've been interviewing some female musicians I had interviewed 15 years ago, and they have a very good reputation. And they say I have to lead all the time. I'm very rarely invited, so I would like to, you know, just be invited and play somebody else's music. It would be very relaxing. But I have to compose my music, I have to find a producer, I have to invite my band, I have to find the gigs. That's what it means to be a woman. It means to be a leader all the time, while being a man means being a leader and being invited. That's where it happens. And Facebook, Instagram don't make such a difference. I mean, I would say even it doesn't make a difference when it comes to being recruited. It's more about, you know, having more people in the audience. But it's not like a big thing because it's jazz. Jazz is not very popular. It doesn't bring crowds like rap music or rock music. So I would say it's a very, very, I mean, it can take a lot of your time, but it's not where things happen. And that's why the visual aspects is more about how do things happen in the interaction. And being a woman, whether you look more or less like a woman in terms of being more or less feminine, is about being framed as a woman, and people don't even think about how they stereotype women and how they don't feel as comfortable with women as with men unless they are their friend's girlfriend. So that's where, you know, the key problem is to be identified, I would say. Not so, you know, not social media don't make such a difference because of the way it works within the jazz world.
Great, thanks.
Okay, any more questions? Okay.
I was wondering, when you talk about the studies you did and the kind of, like, I guess it comes with a lot of numbers and a lot of data, probably. If it was, or to me it seems that the kind of feminism that is in the picture is not very intersectional. For example, we're only talking about women and not about people of color in jazz, for example. When in Germany, jazz is extremely white, for example, and also not talking about queer people, for example. Or there's a lot of things to intersectionality that I think, yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, so I was wondering why not?
Yeah. When, as you said, you start with numbers. If you want to be rigorous, if you want to give, I would say, serious results. In the French jazz world I've been observing, it's very white, it's very middle class, it's very few homosexuals and queer people as anywhere else in the world, and it's not only jazz. So if I want to give results about what does it mean to be an homosexual person in jazz world, or what does it mean to be a colored person, or what does it mean to be, for instance, a queer person, it means I would need to find all the people of color I could find and to start to get results which are not only, you know, this individual or this individual. And it happens that this was not my main focus. Just focusing on women versus men in a world that is very heterosexual, with men and women constituting the most part, was already a very difficult work, because then you have to think, okay, is it because they are women or because they are not as well trained, or because they don't come from the same social origins? For instance, if I was able to say women are over-socialized, it's because so in some ways it's intersectional, but not in the way you think of it, which is a militant way. It's more in the scientific way, sociological way, which is I could intersect age. So being a woman of 20 years is not the same thing as 50, and the same for men. Instruments, levels of reputation, because it's different from being a modest artist and being a well-recognized artist. I could intersect also couple, whether people are alone or in a couple with a jazz musician or with someone from another world, social origins, diploma, whether you are trained or not in a jazz school. So this is intersectional in terms of the way science works, but not intersectional in terms of militancy, which thinks, race, racization, sexuality, and queer women, men, because then I would need to really try to find as many people as possible, and I'm not sure I would find enough people, given my knowledge of the French jazz world, to say more than. So, for instance, I know one homosexual woman, a few homosexual women, one homosexual man for sure. What happens to them could be connected to their sexuality or not. As a sociologist, I need many more cases. So I would have to make it a specific study, which I think would be interesting to do. And the same with people of color. As you said, it's like in Germany, it has become a very, very white, middle class work. So we will need to work on these things. Or the same thing, I didn't speak about lower class people, what happens to them in the jazz world, I think. That would be a very interesting question. So there are many, many questions which I did not address because I don't have enough data, collected data to speak about it seriously, because I focused on other social determinants like age, social origins, a diploma, which are already, which kind of heterosexuality, having kids, not having kids, I also forgot that one. So this is kind of difficult work to make it, and even more so because you have already very few women too. It was like 4% instrumentalists were women, 8% when you included the singers, because there were much more female singers. But it's a very good point. Many studies to make again, I think.
I actually had a similar question.
Okay.
Because I think we had this. Oh, it's not really important. I kind of had the same question. Because I think we had this discussion yesterday in a group of people. And I feel like I think also like probably what Lena implied is just that the idea, like feminism has changed since 1998. So that doesn't mean that all your research doesn't matter anymore, but it's just that like, that's not what I wanted to say, but it's just when we talk about things, we include much more aspects, I guess. So
yes and no, because my studies are not feminist. My studies are sociological studies. When you're going to look at, for instance, racization, you're not going to look at age. It's very difficult to multiply social determinants. So age, for instance, I found that when women age, it's even worse. But this I can find because I have enough women to compare to enough men. It's not with 2 women and 2 men that I can conclude. It's not only difficult to enter jazz world, but it's even worse to age, and I could explain why. Same thing with over-socialization. So the problem, one thing is to be a militant. You have convictions and you fight for whatever you want to fight for. You can fight for queer people, homosexual people, lower class people, whatever. You can pick many causes. And this is I do as a citizen. But when you're doing a sociological study, you need to have enough cases to compare. Or you're going to overinterpret, or you're going to make false assumptions. And in some ways, you're going to nourish common sense and cliché about, because when I started, for instance, now it may look like a very obvious knowledge, but when I started studying the French jazz world, people told me it was historical, anthropological, so it would change by itself. It was just, Women were not there, but they were coming. Like in that, I don't know how to say it in English, but you know, it was happening. And 25 years later, it's still not happening. So this may look like an old or fashioned and ancient topic, even for feminism, but that's what sociological studies try to do, showing no, this is not old-fashioned or outdated. It doesn't mean you don't need other studies, but we need more money, more people to study, because one reason I end up publishing in English while it has never been my objective is because nobody did the same job anywhere else in the world. So, you know, there are not that many people who study. You know, you're militant, you wake up and you go for militancy. You are doing a study, it's 4 years work. And so and we are not that many. So, you know, just developing a topic and doing a serious study and then getting published takes a lot of time. But our objective, whether it's a good one or not, is to avoid common sense and cliche and ideas that, you know, this is how it works, we know everything about it. And in some ways, my hope is that this book becomes, and this study becomes outdated. That's my hope. Maybe in 10 years, wow, Marie Buscatto, you know, she's a dinosaur. It's a prehistoric age. But right now, in the jazz world, it's not feminized.
Yeah,
Yet.
I really didn't mean to minimize your
I'm
studies in any way.
I'm explaining how it works. I don't feel a question at all. You know, my students do the same thing, and we have discussions. I'm just explaining, you know, what it means to do a sociological study as compared to being a militant, where you can pick your cause and you just go for it, and it's good, it's great. I'm a militant too, outside of my work, but I
What
try
do you
to
mean by
disconnect
militant?
both. Militant, it's what you're saying, is you want to defend, you know, whatever the cause is, having more queer people or having more women. Feminism is militancy. Feminism is not science. It's militancy. It's about defending a cause. You want more women in the world. What I'm doing is saying why there are not many women. Then you can do whatever you want with it. You can say, okay, it's good. Women are not meant to be just players. Or you can decide, it's a problem, I want to solve it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not my, you know what I mean? It's,
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. And I've just been wondering, because I think I'm sorry, I'm just gonna ask another question.
Okay.
Now that I have the microphone. I wonder, because of course science always also depends on which kind of studies get funded and which don't. So I wonder if you've had difficulties at some point finding ways to publish your work, or if that has been, like, how has that path been? Because of course, like, doing these studies takes a lot of time, and having the time takes money, and who will give you the money? And yeah.
When I started this study, I was paid to do another study. So this was like my hobby.
Mm-hmm.
Then I became a public servant. And then I got finance, not for this study, but for a project about qualitative methods. I'm very strong, as you may have noticed. I don't think we don't have any objectivity. It's always based on who we are, and that's, you know, part of the reason I worked on this is because I'm a female jazz singer. So, and as such, I was an amateur female jazz singer. That's as such I started observations, and then I worked on reflexivity and how to try to be as fair and neutral as possible. But of course, it's never happened. But you try your best. But when it came, now let's speak about publishing. I've done, I don't know, 12 or 13 different studies, and I published more than 150 books, articles, chapters. So I'm lucky. I don't have problems with publishing. Publishing is, you know, a peer-reviewed story. So if your colleagues find that what you're saying is original, well-founded, well worked out, they think you're reflexive enough, you have enough data, you can publish in the best journals. I published a lot in French because that's where I work and that's where I wanted to be read. And then if militants the media, the musicians are interested in reading you and interviewing you and speaking with you. That's part of my job, but I would say it's like a very secondary part of my job. I like to do it. I think it's important to do it, but it's not why I'm working. I'm working to try to develop rigorous results about topics which may be of interest to the population or not, and it's not my choice. It's people choose to read what they want to read and to listen to what they listen, and to be militant where they want to be militant. You know, it's not my my objective. My objective is try to do the most serious research, and if I do it, I tend to find people to publish me, but I'm published in the scientific world. It doesn't sell much. It's, you know, it's not, I'm not publishing essays or novels. I don't have a Twitter account with 5,000 followers, whatever. You know, I'm a very modest scientist. I mean, scientist.
Yeah.
Cool. Maybe it's time to share some anonymous thoughts. Before this meeting today, people had the possibility to submit anonymously their thoughts and experiences on this theme. With the very interesting and long one, I want to read. I don't read the whole thing because it's quite long, but yeah, I'm going to start. I'm of course against gender discrimination in any form because, in my opinion, that per se does not fit in jazz, which was and is already a music of an oppressed minority. Now, something about the history of this. As far as I know, the fact that women are in the minority in jazz is not mainly due to the behavior of professional musicians, because this can already be seen in university applications where only about 10% of instrumentalists are female, source German Jazz Union. This is due to the decision of girls in puberty who usually decide between 10 and 15 that they don't want to do jazz. This is mostly because jazz at this age appears to be testosterone-charged pubescent boys who want to show what they can do, for example in solo. Even if the boys run the risk of being lonely and not being liked by their friends, because jazz is not popular in this age group. Girls at this age do not like to take the risk. They often want to please their friends. Therefore, all efforts to create equality should start in this age. The current policy of giving, for example, 50% of all jazz prizes or of performances at certain festivals or of state funding to the clear minority of women in jazz is discrimination against men and does not achieve its goals. This policy does not change the problem that 10 to 15-year-old girls mostly prefer to play instruments like cello, violin, harp, guitar, and of course prefer to play pop or classical music just to please. Yeah, what do you think is your
Yeah, okay. Our, as I already said before, is studies in conservatories and music schools showed that not only girls and boys tend to choose feminine and masculine instruments, but their parents, the teachers, their peers, do make sure that they never go the other way around. And when they go the other way around, like a boy who plays the flute or a girl who plays the trumpet, they are confronted with a lot of negative behaviors. So the choice may be, constructed socially in the media and in the families, but they are, it's like a boy who's dancing. So I supervise the studies of in dance, in music, and it's not only about being socialized to think that flute is a feminine instrument. It's also whenever you pick the instrument of the supposedly other sex, or you're confronted with a lot of negative behaviors. And we know also that people who define themselves as queer, non-binary, or transgender, people are confronted with a lot of stigma and a lot of negative behaviors, whatever the social world, because it's still considered as a problem. We are in a very gendered world. The second thing is last year, for some reasons, a jazz musician who was finishing her diploma to become a teacher asked me to supervise her study. And what she was doing, I accompanied her in learning how to observe and how to interview people. And what she observed is jazz classes in which there were many boys and some girls. And what she demonstrated in her memoir, in her study, is that everything was done by the teachers and the other peers to make sure that the girls were, I don't know how to say it in English, disgusted. They just didn't want to play jazz anymore. So they made jazz a very terrible thing to do when you're a girl, whether you assert yourself, because then you're confronted with people who say, ah, or you please, as this person said, and then you're considered as not being interesting. So, and the teachers, male or female, were not even aware of doing that. They were just thinking, oh, the boys like it and the girls don't like it. That's why I don't have many girls. And I've been giving conferences and to stimulate discussions and to stimulate thinking in conservatories, and teachers said, yes, we are not even aware of what we are doing, but we are doing everything to make jazz a very masculine thing, a very masculine world, and a very binary world too. So if we were to study non-binary queer people, they may not feel comfortable in this very binary world where boys are considered as supposed to behave in masculine ways and girls in feminine ways. And it's always pejorative to be along the feminine side of the story.
Okay.
I don't have anything more to say.
Okay, any thoughts or more questions from the audience? Okay. Yeah, I just found it really interesting, the comment about the 50% of foundation that goes to female jazz musicians, and that's a discrimination against men. I found that part really interesting in there. I don't know, maybe someone wants to share a thought on that here? Okay. Yeah, okay, I think we
in some ways, it's when maybe I can react. When I said that, why does it change so slowly when it comes at least to inequalities between men and women, without even speaking about other inequalities which are also happening in jazz. And I said there were three main reasons, and one of them is this idea that talent is there and that we shouldn't help women out, or because it would go against talent, it would be discriminatory, it would be a bad thing. So this is also happening in other art world, and maybe we can connect this impression that this person has, that women are funded and it's discriminatory against men, because this person may not be aware of how many resources men receive naturally, and that the few resources women may be given are just there to try to counteract negative social processes. But if you're not convinced, or if you don't see how discriminatory the world is against, the jazz world is against women, of course you feel it's very unjust and unfair to give them more resources. If you think they are treated fairly, why should they be helped more? So, you know, it's always a question of, because it's, for some people it seems obvious, but for some people it's not obvious at all. They don't feel it's discriminatory, and that's what people were telling me 20 years ago, and they don't say it now, but they don't act more. They were not feeling discriminatory. They were feeling it was, you know, the girls were not as assertive, and the jazz was very masculine, but, you know, one day it will happen, and so that's where sociological studies sometimes are helpful, at least for people who are eager to listen to them and to read them, is they can identify how it works and why it is more or less discriminatory. And that's what I try to do with jazz, and I've been trying to do in other studies, and my colleagues do in their own ways whenever we study these topics.
Yeah, I have one thought as well, because we are talking about talent, and also you were saying earlier about in the orchestra they have a screen, so they don't see if it's a woman or a man standing there. So obviously we do have a lot of female musicians that are talented, so I think they do deserve to get that fundings and that sponsorships. And so I think for me personally, it's a good thing that now things change and go into that direction, that we push women and support them and what they do. Yeah.
It's your militant position.
I'm sorry.
No, I was asked what militancy was. I mean, that's,
Ja. Oder? Ah. Sehe hier auch nichts? Ah, okay, ja, dann.
Yeah, I have another question as far as education goes, because you were already talking about the fact that the universities and like the whole educational process of becoming a musician is very much affected by this inequality, and I'm curious on your thought about the. I mean, as you said, it's not really your task to give kind of ideas or tips or so, but as far as like research goes, because we are talking about like a big part of this educational process is looking at the history, like for example of jazz, and then we listen to all the old jazz grades and stuff, and just percentage-wise, it is a lot men, of course, still. And I'm curious on your thought about this idea of changing that, and yeah, what could be done in that direction, because I guess it's such a big part.
As I said, I'm not here to tell people what to do or what not to do, because I have no clue. I mean, in some ways, it's up to people to decide which society they want and how they want to behave and to make choices together. What I can say is, based on my study and the studies of my colleagues who work on different musical fields, including classical music, is what we find is, on the one side, it's not necessarily what women were being trained like most. So the social processes I spoke about were much more powerful in explaining why it was more difficult for women than for men. The fact that there are feminine stereotypes which are used to denigrate their work and their way of being. The fact that there are networking is masculine. The fact that the social conventions are masculine, and as a girl you socialize to be feminine, and when you go against your feminine socialization, you hurt people's feelings. And the fact that when you're above 30 years old, you tend to have difficulties to find a male partner or a female partner, if you're a homosexual person, who is going to be in charge of your kids while you're on the road. So these are, like the key social processes I identified, and in some ways my colleagues identify in other fields. It doesn't mean it cannot be helpful to have more feminine composers and feminine works, feminine role models, but it's not where things happen first. It's, if schools start to open their gates to girls and they learn to do the work, and boys learn to work with them equally, That's where, you know, things in the daily interactions, in the ways we deal with each other, and that being a man, a woman, a queer, a non-binary doesn't make a difference. That's where, you know, in some ways, things seems to be happening most. It doesn't mean that everything is, it's not interesting to do. Like recently, Terry Lynn Carrington, she issued the first real book with only feminine compositions, like 101, and she wants to create 9 more. So that's part of how, you know, how you try to create a female-friendly environment. Why not? What I can say is, what's important to have schools where women can learn the trade, and when they work, they are considered as equal musicians as men. And this is more in terms, you know, it's more a question of networking, a question of stereotypes, a question of conventions, than a question of playing female music or male music. That's, yeah, I would say, based on my studies and the studies of my colleagues. It doesn't mean it's not interesting. I would say it's not as important.
Yeah. So what you're suggesting is that the kind of the change is being made if we are like thinking in the moment rather than like necessarily looking back. So kind of providing the playing field that where we can connect equally on that page.
Yeah, it's the example I was giving, like this study this musician did on how do we teach jazz. Jazz is not taught the same way whether you're a girl or a boy. That's already a way not to have women at the end, and it's I cannot say more. In some ways, it's then how to do it is up to people. It's do they want to change their ways to interact, to view others, and how do you do it? I have no clue. I mean, it's, even when I teach, I try to be fair with men and women and to treat them equally. And the first thing I do is I know I won't behave the same, and they won't behave the same with me because I'm a woman as compared to a man. And now I'm aging, and they don't behave the same, you know, depending on my age, depending on your status. I mean, depending on the color of my skin. These things have an influence on how people view you and how they interact with you. And the same thing happens, and in the jazz world, it's very strong. So stereotypes are very strong, and networking is very masculine, conventions are very masculine, and socializations are very masculine. So that's where things seem to happen most.
Cool.
So maybe it's time for music now for you all.
Yeah, maybe as the last thing, I want to share some responses of the Anonymes Formular again. Where is it? Oh yeah, there are like 2 comments. Like one of the questions was, how can we make the music scene a more safer, comfortable place for all genders? And the first answer was, I don't experience the Cologne jazz scene as an unsafe and uncomfortable place. On the contrary, I find the interaction very open, friendly, and respectful. Sure, there's a level of competition between them that some may find stressful, but isn't that part of all creative professions? If there are more people who behave inappropriately towards others, regardless of the reason, then this should be made public. But we should be careful not to get into a hypersensitive mode where we all treat each other like raw eggs. That kills the free, open togetherness. And then the other response was also, we should stop accepting how it is. Stand up for equality and seek allies. Also explain to them that it's not enough to say, I think that's stupid, but actively intervene in the situation, even if it gets uncomfortable. Create safe spaces and talk to each other. So I think I find really interesting the different point of views both people have. So maybe you have a comment on that. And second, maybe people here from the Cologne jazz scene want to also comment on the first response.
Maybe only one comment to go back to the what could have appeared as a defense of my methods is one reason I need to have a lot of people observed and interviewed is to make sure that what I assess is not, for instance, a competitive environment, which would be the same for men and women, but a competitive environment which is different for men and women. And that's why it's very difficult when you start to work on minorities is how can you have enough homosexual people or queer people or non-binary people or racialized people in a very wide environment to know what is linked to their difference as compared to it's just the way it works for everyone, but they may not like it or they may not be socialized for it or so whatever. So in some ways it's saying that jazz is a competitive environment doesn't mean it's a safe environment for women or for queer people or for people who are different. It's not necessarily one thing doesn't explain the other. Competition doesn't mean there is no discrimination. On the contrary, it can be used to discriminate even better. So it really depends on how it works and how things are organized. So maybe that's something I could say, a comment that would come up based on all these different interesting comments.
Okay. Any more questions or thoughts about the last comments we just read?
There would be a question from me. Just like we all had this very professional questions, and I thought it was very interesting. But there would be one personal question I would like to ask you, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be like you've worked in this field for so long, and I think that you researched this phenomenon like so many years ago already is really I think it's really great, but the thing is I always when you talk about it I think that you have a really kind of professional way of looking at it and saying like, okay, this is my job and this is like I have to have the facts and I don't have to I can't be prejudgmental. And on the other hand, maybe, I don't know, there are things that you have named militant that maybe, in the end, what I want to say is like, is it ever hard for you to stay professional and to say, okay, whatever happens here is complicated, and not saying like, okay, this is total shit and I can't stand it anymore. How do you manage your feelings towards it?
Oh, okay.
If it's okay for me to ask, just.
Yes. Yeah, it's a very difficult question. How can I say it? In some ways, as I said, I'm militant in different areas of my life. And of course, when you're a militant or when you have convictions, you would like the world to look like what you want it to be, whether it's a jazz world or whatever. At the same time, maybe the reason I became a scientist, it was not my first choice. And I mean, scientist, we agree, it's a very strong word for what I'm doing, but I'm trying to do rigorous studies at least. is because it helps me deal with my emotions in some ways. And when I'm doing that, I try to be as rigorous, systematic as possible. And if I start to implicate myself in the discussion and I start to give advice, I can see some of my colleagues doing it. I stop being good at what I'm doing. And what I find at the end of the day is, as I said, I did more than 10 studies in my life, and the reasons it could be interesting for the people who were studied, not only for my scientific colleagues who were publishing my work, but also for the people who are part of the study, because I always share my results, I discuss them, I remain available, sometimes through email, sometimes on the phone, sometimes in conferences like that, is because I remain where I should remain. So, of course, I have emotions, and sometimes I'm angry, and sometimes I'm happy, and sometimes, like everybody else, I'm quite emotional. But I'm convinced professionally that if I know where to stand and to, in this very, very fragile place where you know people enough to be able to understand what they are doing, but you're not part of their lives, so you can reflect and try to be as rigorous as possible. In some ways, that's where you help more, maybe. Maybe that's, I say that, maybe tomorrow I will say the other thing, another thing, but, and it's a very difficult position to keep, because journalists and people who, militants and people who are, want to change the world ask you to change the world. And it's very easy to think that because you understood how it works, you know how it could work. And this is my experience is when people start doing it, I have some of my colleagues who are doing it or who did it, they start to be not very good scientists, in that what they are, their studies are not rigorous as they used to be. In some ways, they lose what makes our studies interesting. You see what I mean? So that's my conviction. Maybe, you know, it's an illusion, but it's the illusion I live with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe could I ask you to go back to the last comment you showed, from the anonymous comments? Yes, so luckily I am not a professional, so I can be militant, and I would like to share some emotions that I had on that first comment, because I think reading this made me a bit mad, because I think it shows what's part of the problem, because the question that was asked was how the music scene could make more safe, could be made more safe or comfortable, and the person who wrote that first answer just shared their own personal experience, which is it not being uncomfortable, and therefore made the problem seem small, and made up the real problem to be that, oh, you shouldn't have to be too careful and not treat each other like raw eggs, when I think people like this would be the people that would be stepping on those eggs if we did that. So I just wanted to not leave that uncommented, because I just wanted to share that.
Can I ask something according to this? I would like to ask, I don't know if it was you, or it doesn't matter, but whoever decided on which comments to show or to discuss, because I assume that this was not the only comments that got in. And I feel that if we are for once talking about this, and even have someone here talking about research and stuff, why do we choose to, because everybody knows that these opinions are there in the Cologne jazz scene. And I am in the Cologne jazz scene, and I know that everybody says this, and I know that it's not comfortable. And I feel that by choosing this comment, we kind of widen the discourse, and people have to defend themselves instead of being able to talk about what we could do. So I wonder if there have been more replies, why to choose one reply that is not replying to the question when there have probably been others. That's what I was wondering.
I can talk on that. There were not that many replies actually. So we had this too. And wait a second, I have to watch in the response. Yeah, this was the big. Wait, you can't see it, right? Wait a second. Yeah. So these are our responses. This was the big one, which I talked in the beginning about. I think.
But I thought we had two questions, right? I thought we had one question about the experience and one question about how we can make the scene more safe.
But there is another reply that is which I feel is I was just, you don't have to. It's.
I can read it, but it's. I think I didn't translate it because it was fresh. I think so, but I can read it in German. Then we have all replies read.
But that's also not the point. Like it's. I think I just wanted to say that it's also a choice to put this in the discourse. That's what and then I ask why, not so that you read the other one, but because especially if there's no translation, it makes no sense. But just to put it there, that it's also a choice that forms the discourse if we let this happen, right? Instead of also making a statement and just for once not,
the
like
choice.
to not discuss if it is a thing, when obviously it is a thing, when we even have a sociologist telling us that it is. I think just want to say it's a choice, and the question would be why, but you can answer it or not, but it's not about reading the other.
Okay, yeah. No, I choose especially those two different responses because I found interesting that there are like really two different perspectives on this, and that's why I read both, and especially about the Cologne jazz scene. Maybe I thought it's a good starter for people saying here something about it. Yeah.
I think that the one opinion is heard often and a lot, and also it's not, I think if we always talk about is discrimination and is blah blah, is that a thing, then we cannot talk about anything else, like for example interesting things like solutions, or where it gets difficult, for example, talking about intersectionality. But if we always allow all the people, and I mean they can say what they want, I just wanted to point out that it's also a choice of curation. And of course everybody, they can say it. I was just wondering if for once we couldn't not discuss if it's a thing, that it's uncomfortable for people. We always talk about that, and then people want to have facts. Now we have facts, so I just thought maybe now we could not talk about if the jazz scene is uncomfortable or not. Of course, people are allowed to say it. I just ask why this choice?
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, are there more questions or opinions? Okay. Okay, then thank you all for being here. I think it's already also time for the session. We are already like 10 minutes of the time schedule, I think. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, no? I don't know.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Yes? Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for the discussion and the questions, and good luck with your jam. Have fun.